Everybody, I think we're live. Says live in the video, but I got to stroll. Oh, there we go. Now I think we're officially live. Hey everybody, and welcome again to another AMA. I am Steve White, CEO of RentPrep, and if you're joining us again, welcome back. Appreciate everyone's engagement from the last AMA. I feel like we had a pretty good turnout and hopefully answered a lot of questions. And it was as helpful as I could be. And obviously, same goes for this time around. If I don't get to your question, or if you have a follow-up question, or want to dive deeper than what I'm going into, feel free to reach out to a moderator or post in the community, and I'll make sure that I get back to you. You can also email me directly at steve@rentprep.com, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have there. I've got a little bit of a different setup this time around. Hopefully it works, and hopefully everyone can hear me pretty well, and the sound quality is pretty good. Last time I had a webcam that was pretty far away and wasn't very ideal. So this time I think we've got a little bit of a better setup. All right. I'm going to jump into the questions. I have the video that I'm using here, or the camera that I'm using, is on a laptop, so I can move about. Last time I did the video, I had myself shut in my office here, and the temperature went way up, and some of you noticed that I had a couple of drips of sweat running down my brow. And so if I do stand up and open the door, it's just because the temperature is going up in here, and I'll need to do that rather than sit here and sweat like last time. And then also, I had a couple of people ask about our office. I'm happy to do a quick walkthrough and show some people the office if you guys are interested in that, and give you a peek at RentPrep and what's going on here, and where all of those screening reports that we're doing and background checks come from. So, jumping right in, we got a first question from Nick. So Nick says, I'm finally taking out a mortgage to buy my first multi-unit property, and I do plan on living in one unit. I just received my sales agreement. Do you have any advice on what I should look for in a sales agreement, any red flags, etc.? And are there any contingency I should add with my realtor? So, never hurts to ask for, the contingencies, or see what somebody's willing to to offer up. So that I would say yes. Is there anything specific? I would say probably the usual stuff that you would with your realtor. Maybe not the right situation for closing costs, conversations, things like that. But the realtor usually has some pretty good ideas on maybe what to ask for, what they might be willing to give or to offer. So I would say the first thing, and I see Allie just posted a comment in here, and that was going to be part of my response here. So in Allie's question, kind of similar, she just purchased a property that's currently being leased. So my question for Nick would be, is that, I know you're planning on living in one unit, is the other unit rented out, and is it currently being leased? And so, those leases, typically, they're enforceable through the lifetime of the lease, regardless of who owns that property. So you can always re-engage in a new lease, which I would definitely recommend doing if they're willing. If they're not willing to do it before the lease is up, then you got to wait for the lease is up and then enter in a new lease. But keep in mind that lease agreement is is enforceable for the lifetime of that agreement. Unless it says something in there about the sale of the property. A lot of times they don't. So I would say, usually those again, those leases live outside of what's happening with the sale of the property, and so you have to honor the lease that they have, unless again you can, get them to sign a new lease. And if they're on a month to month, then that first month, present them with a new lease, have that conversation with them, put some terms on it. If they're okay with it, if they want to stick to that month to month and you're fine with that, then obviously you can make that decision as well. But when you're inheriting tenants, there is sort of a transition period, right? Sometimes they have some expectations, right? Like, are you going to be sort of the new sheriff in town? How are you going to be as a landlord? Did they have a good relationship with the past landlord? Are there some things on their list of, I wish the old landlord would have gotten to this and these things never got fixed? So, are there any of those type of items that they're going to hit you with right away? A lot of times there are. So be prepared for that. And, I would say a little bit of goodwill goes a long way. And if you could knock some of those things out and try to build a good relationship, especially if it's a long-term tenant, then that's good. Finding good tenants is not easy. So if you're inheriting a tenant from a purchased property and they seem like they are good long-term tenants, then, by all means try to keep them. And it may be a good idea to give yourself at least a little bit of time to get to know them. Don't always just trust the previous owner and the previous landlord. Last thing you want to do is throw a year lease down thinking that you're preserving a really great relationship, and within a couple of weeks you find out this is, I didn't pick this person. This is not the type of person that I want here for the next year, and now you're stuck. So, give it a little time. Like I said, usually if they're on a month to month, start having conversations with them right away about signing a new lease, talking about terms, and sometimes if they're interested in renewing the lease, new terms or anything like that, then you might be able to get them to sign a new lease before that old one is over. That's really up to them. You can't, again, unless it says something in their old lease, you really can't compel them to do that. So you have to honor the lease that's in place. Any other red flags? I'd ask about the security deposit. That's usually forgotten about. I know that's been an issue in the past with landlords who purchased a property. Time goes by, nobody's thinking about it. You're certainly not in communication anymore with the person you purchased the property from, and next thing you know, a few years goes by, and where did that $1,500 deposit go? I have no idea. So just make sure that where that deposit money is, where it's sitting. You have to transfer that money or take access to that account. So trying to think if there's anything else. Yeah, like I said, just spend some time with that new tenant, or the old tenant in this case, but you're their new landlord. Spend some time getting to know them. Set up a time or a call, Zoom call, whatever, or meet them on the property. But give them some respect to to get to know what it's like living there. Maybe some issues they're having, what their plans are. They're going to stick around for a while, but that's always well worth your time to to spend that time with the tenants there. If you're living with them, it's a lot easier, and you're for sure going to want to have those conversations sooner than later. And you'll know pretty quickly if they're the type of people that you want living next door to you and sharing a building with or not. So, get to know them as quick as you possibly can. All right. So I hope that answers your question, Nick. And then for Allie, the similar question: you want to make the transition as easy as possible. How do you normally transfer, get a new lease signed? So I think I answered it there for you. Find out what kind of lease term they have in place. Find out if the lease has any language that you have to, about sale of the property or anything like that, or transferring the lease. and then take it from there. But more often than not, you want to get that lease signed in your name and a new lease in place that's yours. Okay. So moving on, we've got a question from Maggie. Maggie says, I want to sell a house, but the tenants just signed a lease. What are my options? So, again, if the lease says anything in there about selling the property, then like I said, that lease is a binding agreement, and you have to honor that lease. It's not like you can kick the people out, and you may not want to. If you're selling the house and the tenants just signed the lease, an investor might want to buy it that has tenants in there already. That's a big, especially if they're a new investor, that's a big step that they get to skip. So having an occupied rental property is definitely more attractive to some investors. So you find the right person, and that's going to be of interest to them, that you've already got tenants in there, you've already got a lease in place. So again, I would just be upfront, honest, open with that. And again, I think there's enough people out there that want that situation, that you're going to have interest. I don't think it's a downside for most that the property's occupied. Again, it means they get to skip some steps in finding tenants if it's a rental property. Okay. Next question I've got here is from Bob. How much do you share when you give notice of non-renewal on a lease? So I'm assuming you mean how much do you share as to why you're not renewing the lease. So I'm assuming in this situation, Bob, these people, for one reason or another, made you not want to continue to rent to them, and you just want to be done, and you're not going to renew the lease. So you really don't have to, share a lot of information at all. You can just say, we're just not, we're not renewing the lease. Make sure you're giving them proper notice. Some states vary, but for most states, it's usually 30 or 60 days that you've got to give proper notice that their lease won't be renewed. COVID is obviously, and the CARE Act is putting some different rules to that. So make sure that you're checking your local state laws. I know a lot of states bumped up to 90 days for lease renewals or non-lease renewals. And again, because of COVID, I would say really make sure that you're checking to make sure that what you're doing is in line with all of the new rules, and especially with your state rules. It may not be an awful idea to run it by your attorney. Again, normally that might not be my answer typically, but in this COVID era that we're in, it's probably not a horrible idea. So I would say run it by your attorney. Make sure that you're doing it by the book. Make sure that you're not displacing somebody. Make sure that somebody's not going to be able to make a claim against you. And just make sure you're doing it correctly. And it varies so much by states right now that there's really no right answer that I can give you without either knowing your state or researching and making sure that I'm giving you the most up-to-date information as well. So on that one, I'm going to say you don't usually have to give them information on why. Usually they know. And given the current times, definitely double check with your attorney. Just make sure that you're doing it right. All right. So we got a next question here from John. So the pandemic has created a situation in our part of southern New Jersey where units are scarce and rents are jumping to crazy heights. We have a tenant at the end of his lease period and very interested in renewing. He's been an excellent tenant. Is an increase of 3% over the base rent reasonable? So couple of thoughts there. New York, I know last year, or maybe 2019, I think it was, passed a bunch of laws that impacted landlords, and one of them that they sort of tucked into a lot of different legislation was how much you can increase the rent, and 3% would be over that threshold. So double check, make sure New Jersey doesn't have the same restrictions on how much you can increase rent. The other thing you want to make sure too is that you want to make sure that you're not painting yourself out to be a bad guy who's, gouging anybody. 3% in most areas is not crazy, is not unreasonable. So as long as you're within the legal right to do that, and I would also, again, have a question or have a conversation with the tenant. It's an excellent tenant, right? So how much is an excellent tenant really worth to you? If you had a bad tenant and I asked you that same question, you're probably going to give me a much different answer. An excellent tenant is worth a lot more when you're dealing with a bad tenant. When you have a really good tenant, sometimes you forget, or you don't have that painful reminder in the moment of really what a bad tenant ends up costing you in the long run. And I don't just mean monetarily and the damages. I mean the stress, the energy that you put into it, the sleepless nights, the 1,000-yard stares at dinner, all of those things that landlords have to deal with because of a bad tenant that can really ruin your day for sure. So how much is that good tenant worth to you? If they push back a little bit and 3% might force them to move out, I would say just be careful that you're not being short-sighted in the sense that, well, if they move out and then I'll get somebody else in here that's going to pay the rent increase, and so I'm coming out ahead on it. That's assuming that they're going to be an excellent tenant as well. So, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. I would say make sure that you've got good communication there. Explain the reason for the increase. It's not crazy to say that you're trying to keep up with the market as well, and you're trying to think ahead, and you're trying to prepare for if this tenant doesn't stay for another lease term or something like that, and you don't want to jump things too much, or whatever your reasoning is. But either way, I would say have a good conversation with them ahead of time. Let them know what your intentions are, and if you start to get a sense that 3% is going to spook them or scare them away, again, I would say really sit down and think about what an excellent tenant is worth. Not just, you said excellent, not good tenant. So I'm assuming that they fit the avatar of what an excellent tenant is, which is somebody that you don't have to think about, worry about. They're not going to flush socks down the toilet. They're not going to kick holes in the wall. They're paying their rent on time. You don't have neighbor complaints. Those things are all super valuable to your sanity. So just keep that in the back of your mind as well. Don't let the 3% blind you for what really the value of that tenant potentially is there. Okay. And the last thing I'll mention about that, just came into my mind here, is double check with your lease that you're writing. Most leases typically have an increase built into them. If it doesn't, that's something that you might want to consider. And again, just double check with New Jersey to make sure that you're not going beyond that threshold of how much you can increase the rent year over year. I think in New York State it's 2%. So, all right. Moving on, next question. Question from Alberto. Prospective tenants taking too long to sign the lease and submit a security deposit. I have another party ready to sign and pay. Am I obligated to follow through with the first party? So, you're not obligated to follow through with the first party in most states. Some states do require that it's, first come, first served state, but even in those situations, it's got to be within reason. If somebody's, making you wait an unreasonable amount of time, then, then you certainly don't have to wait 30 days or more to get them to sign it. Now, that comes down to what's the question of too long. I would say, you want to make sure that you're putting expectations on this. So if you didn't tell them ahead of time, I need to have this back, by Monday, or I need to have this back by Friday, then there really are no expectations. So I would say that's step number one for you, is lay out an expectation if you haven't already. I would reach out to them, tell them, hey, I've got somebody else that's interested. I want to get this thing wrapped up, especially as we're a few days before the first of the month. So it would make sense that you want to get this wrapped up. And a lot of times, from what we see here in processing a lot of applications, applicants don't want to say no or burn a bridge or walk away from a potential deal where they're approved. But a lot of times they have other irons in the fire, and they're out looking for other apartments and seeing where they're going to get accepted. And so, you might be, their second or third choice, and they're waiting to see if number one comes through, and so they're dragging their feet and holding off. So if that's the case, then I would try to move them along. Give them a time frame. Hey, I want to have this thing signed by the first, and I need something from you. I need some sort of communication from you. If they can't pay the security deposit, that's a different story. And maybe even try to have a conversation with them about that. If they feel like that might be the issue, maybe approach it that way as well. In my opinion, and from our experience here at RentPrep, I would say not being able to pay a security deposit is really usually a pretty big red flag. So if they're dragging their feet because they can't pay the security deposit, or they're having a tough time coming up with it, you got to take that into consideration. So, try to figure out maybe why they're taking a long time, and then, create a deadline or some sort of expectation for them, and then obviously follow through. But again, the only concern that I would have there is, if it's a first come, first served state or municipality, then you just want to make sure that you're at least giving them ample amount of time. And I don't believe, I could be wrong about this, and I would double check with your local state municipality, but I don't believe I'm aware of any first come, first serve states that talk about a time frame that it has to be offered and executed by a new lease. So again, I think it's got to be within reason. It's got to be clearly communicated expectations. It can't be anything crazy like, I need you to sign right here tonight, otherwise I'm going with someone else. Usually, you give them a couple of days and try to work with them. And if they're not responsive, or don't seem like they're very interested, just make sure that you're documenting all of your conversations and any actions that you might take. So, just make sure that you're making notes in case it ever comes back to that. You can say, listen, I had a conversation with them on the 20th. They said they were going to get back to me. They never did. On the 27th, I reached back out, followed up with them, gave them a time frame that I wanted to have this done by the first. Didn't hear back from them, so I moved on. And as long as as long as you're keeping good notes there, good documentation, if something ever comes back, you can go back and say, yeah, I took good notes on this, and here's exactly what happened. So that usually ends up saving you in the long run. All right. Question from Jill. So Jill says, I recently received an email from an agency which offers rental assistance. Apparently, I have a tenant who has requested rental assistance. She has not said a word to me. The agency is asking me to fill out a W-9. Why would I need to fill out a W-9 when my contract is with the tenant and not an agency? Good questions. So the reason that you've got to fill out a W-9 is because the agency is going to pay you directly. So I'm assuming it's like in New York, we've got Section 8, and they typically pay, it's income based, so it's typically, based on what that person's need is for assistance. So, let's say just for easy numbers, you're charging $1,000 in rent, and that person's going to get rental assistance and have $500 of that $1,000 rent paid by the rental assistance agency. They're going to send you a check directly every month. And anytime anybody pays you directly, they're going to want a W-9 so they know, who they're paying and track it accurately for tax purposes. So the tenant doesn't have any obligation to let you know that they're doing this, and I found that more often than not they usually won't let you know that they're doing this. So if you've never had a situation like this before, Jill, or have never rented to rental assistance, it's on one hand it's great because you're getting money from an agency and they pay right as rain. I mean, they're not going to miss a payment on you, so that's good. The downside is you're usually obligated to pass some inspections to make sure that the house is up to par. So that's something that you've got to consider. And then the other thing is assistance has to be considered legitimate income. So you can't deny a person based on the fact that they are on rental assistance. You have to consider that money as legitimate income. So you got to be really careful that you're not, saying anything that's going to get you in trouble, or approaching the tenant and saying, "Why didn't you let me know?" or "I don't want to participate in this." You got to be careful with how you approach that. So. I would say I would work with your the assistance agency, whoever that is, if it's Section 8 or whatever state that you're in, whatever they call it there. Work with them, make sure you understand what your potential obligations are, and again, it's not necessarily a bad thing or a horrible thing. It could be the difference between your tenant paying rent or not being able to pay rent, and now you got a different problem on your hands. So not necessarily an awful thing. And I know in a lot of states the waiting list is really, really long. I know in New York it's a really long waiting list to get on rental assistance. So you could be waiting a while, or this tenant may have applied a long time ago and it's finally coming through, and finally, she made the list, and now she's actually going to, or he's actually going to be able to get the assistance. So, it may not be something that, that they just purposely neglected to tell you, although a lot of times I find that to be the case. They don't want to, to let you know, or, let you know that they're struggling. So, just be mindful that you're not treating that as anything other than legitimate income, because it is, and that's now included in the anti-discrimination laws. You can't discriminate against legitimate income. Rental assistance counts as legitimate income. So, okay, and the W-9 is totally normal. Fill that out, send it in, no worries. If you've got a business, put your business ID in there. If not, you got to put your social security number in there. But there's nothing fishy or funny going on. That's totally normal. all of our vendors here, we send W-9s, we receive W-9s, so it's not crazy at all. Okay, so moving on to the next question from Steve. What's your experience using a realtor for rentals? I'm struggling to find quality renters in Las Vegas with verifiable income without bad credit, evictions, and judgments. So, I would say, I guess I'm kind of old school because I remember back when a lot of realtors didn't do rentals, but it was really the housing crisis that shifted a lot of realtors into getting into the rental market because the housing market was a mess. The buying and selling of the houses was a mess back in the 2008 2009 financial crisis. So as really like a survival tactic, a lot of realtors started getting into tenant placements. Typically they're going to charge you first month's rent. That's like the most common fee that I see associated with using a realtor. If you're having trouble though, finding good quality applicants with verifiable income, I would say, a couple of different things. My first question would be, is it the property itself? Is the property itself the type of property that's going to attract a higher quality tenant? So are your expectations maybe out of alignment? If it's a property that's not going to attract a really high quality tenant, and maybe there's nothing you can do about it. Maybe it's the area, but if it's something with the unit itself, then consider putting a little bit into the unit, sprucing it up, little curb appeal, whatever you can do to try to attract maybe a higher quality renter. If you feel like it's a higher quality, like the quality of the unit's good and you're not getting the type of applicants that you should be, then I would consider, what you're doing to advertise that listing. And again, without knowing a whole lot about the situation, I would say, but I do know in Las Vegas, it's a lot like different areas in New York where you could be in a really nice neighborhood, you turn a corner, you're not in a really nice neighborhood anymore, you turn another corner, you're back in another nice neighborhood. So, that could be a part of it. But I would try to look at your funnel, the top of the funnel. Where are you getting your leads from? Where are you posting your listing? Do you have a sign out in front? The worst thing you can do is get desperate and take anybody. So whatever you can do, avoid that. If it has to come down to getting a realtor, it's not a horrible idea. I know a lot of, again, I feel like it comes down to the quality of the unit, but I know a lot of, good tenants, good renters, especially if they're moving from out of the area or whatever. They'll use a realtor, so it's not crazy. It's just, kind of expensive. You're giving up that first month's rent to place that tenant. So just keep that in the back of your mind, and that would be maybe like a last ditch effort. But I would definitely consider that before you got desperate and took just anybody. Be picky. This is your chance to be picky. I've said it before on previous AMAs, my own rentals. So I'm putting my money where my mouth is. I let a rental sit from September until March one time because I just couldn't find the right tenant, and I was very picky. And I had some emotional attachment to the property. It was the house that I lived in. I raised my son in, so it wasn't like some income property I bought. It was, it was my family's house. I wanted to make sure that it went to people who cared about it and cared for it. And I still have those same tenants in there. It was the best decision I ever made. I've been doing tenant screening and background checks long enough to know that, the worst mistake that you can make is to compromise out of desperation. And so I held the line and wouldn't accept anybody that didn't meet my criteria. And, that rental property sat vacant for a lot longer than I wanted it to, and I was paying a mortgage on it at the time too. So, it was an expensive decision, but I still feel like ultimately the right one. There's still tenants there. They're great, and they're the best tenants because they treat the property like their own home. I mean, that's what every landlord wants, right? Like, to find somebody that treats that property like it's their own home, in a respectful way, right? Like, not making modifications and things like that. All right. Next question I've got here is from Lisa. So in California, I have a tenant that just finished a year-long lease, and I changed them to a month-to-month lease. Do I have to give a 30-day or 60-day notice? So the first lease term expired, and it rolled over to a month-to-month. If that's the case, and that's how the original lease was written, which most of them are, then no, you don't have to give any notice. It's just, it's part of the lease terms that are baked into that lease that they signed. It's going to roll over. It's going to automatically go month to month. If the lease does not state that, and the lease is just going to end, and you want them to sign a new lease, I can't think of a specific statute on like the notice you'd have to give. I mean, you'd want to have good communication, and you'd want to give notice, but I can't think of like, any legalities around that you have to give notice. I mean, you're not removing them. You're not displacing them. You're not telling them that you're not renewing the lease. That would be a different story. You're just telling them, hey, your original lease term ended. Got to enter into a new lease term. So again, just, you don't want to do it on the day that the lease expires, but you want to make sure that there's enough time in there for yourself to prepare as also. If they don't plan on staying, you're going to want to know that, right? If they plan on packing up and leaving on the termination date of that lease, and you don't know that's not going to be a great situation for you. You're going to be scrambling to try to refill that unit. So I'd say good communication. I don't think that there's any requirement to give some sort of legal notice in your specific situation. I would almost be willing to bet that lease that you have them on, that original 1-year lease term and lease agreement that they have, has some language in there about what happens when that lease term expires. And I'd be willing to bet that it talks about rolling them over to month. So, yeah. If there's any other details in there, Lisa, feel free to comment, question, or obviously you can reach out to me directly. But at face value, I don't think that you've got to provide any kind of notice in that situation at all. Okay. Question from Linda. So Linda says, I'm just getting started with a rental property. Do I run a background check on all applicants, or should I do a short list and then run a check? What are red flags I should be looking for on these checks? So, good question. I'm the right person to answer that question. Sometimes I'm giving answers based on, knowledge as a landlord, or if it's a situation I haven't been in, maybe I got my ear to the ground and I know what's going on. But in this situation, if we're talking about background checks and tenant screening, that's my jam. So I can help you with that. So do you run a background check on all applicants? Okay, so I'm going to paint a scenario here. If you have a couple, and it doesn't matter if they're husband and wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, brother, sister, it doesn't matter, and they want to rent your property, yes, you're going to run a background check on all occupants. So I just want to get that out of the way first. Your question, I think, is more specifically geared towards if you have 3 people apply to the apartment, should you run 3 background checks and, or as you mentioned, shortlist. So if you have 10 people, apply, you pick the top 3 that you feel like meet your qualifications or could be good, and then you're going to run a background check on those 3, and then it's like it's like Survivor. You're gonna put somebody's torch out. So some states don't want you to do that. There's a first come first serve, and you have to go in order that you receive the applications. So you got applicant A, B, and C, and the correct way to do that would be run a background check on applicant A. If they meet your criteria, that's your renter. If they don't, you move on to applicant B, do the same thing. So the first thing that I would say is make sure that you have clearly defined screening criteria. And it's a good idea to share it with the applicants, right? Let them know what your criteria is and make sure that it's lawful. So you can say, hey, the criteria is I want to make sure that there's no recent evictions. You got to have a credit score of 600. You can't owe your current landlord. You have to be current on your rent with your landlord. Reasonable things like that. But you want to have a set of criteria that is standard to everyone, and so that will prevent any kind of discrimination accusations against you if you're treating somebody differently than the previous applicant. So you want to make sure you're using the same screening criteria with every applicant. So the first thing you should be doing is making sure at face value, right? Do they meet your criteria? So, based off the application, there should be some things that you can immediately check and see. So, do they meet your rent to income ratio, which is usually 3 to 1. Usually in a conversation you're having with them, maybe on a pre-screen sort of interview with them, are they a smoker? Do they have any animals with them? Any of those type of things. And if you genuinely have 3 pre-qualified applicants that meet your screening criteria on face value, as long as you don't live in a first come first serve state, I would absolutely run 3 background checks and be able to compare. So, the thing to remember, especially with picking tenants, is you want a good pool of applicants, obviously, number one. It's better to choose the best out of 10 than the least worst out of 2 or 3. So if you're getting a good number of applicants, make sure that you've got good screening criteria. Make sure that you're able to, use your application to first pre-screen. And the last piece of advice I'll give you there is if you're running screening on applicants 3 at a time, right? So you know that 2 people are not going to get the unit. In my opinion, I would be prepared to return their application fees if you're charging an application fee. If not, and you're just passing, or making them pay for the background check, which, RentPrep obviously offers that option as well. So if you wanted to pay for it yourself or pay for the applicant or make the applicant pay for it. But by far the number one dispute that we see or hear about here is people who paid an application fee, didn't get the apartment, and they will kick and scream until they get that application fee back, even though it's only 20, 30, whatever, however much it is. It's a matter of principle to them. And I promise you, it's not worth the money to keep it. It's well worth it just to give it back to them. And if it costs you the cost, the cost of a background check, that's an easy trade-off versus having an applicant call, email, leave you nasty voice messages, stalk you on Facebook, disparage you in all different ways. So in those cases, I just return the application fee, send them on their way. So so it's okay to run multiple screenings and compare. Again, you just want to make sure that they at least qualify at face value before you do that. You don't want to run a screening on somebody that doesn't meet your income to rent ratio that you could have seen on an application and could have immediately disqualified them just based on that. The other red flags you should be looking for are, the obvious stuff, right? Evictions. If you're in New York, you can't search evictions, unfortunately, but in my opinion, that is the number one piece of data that a landlord could have and look at. Statistically speaking, somebody who's been evicted is 3 times more likely to be evicted again. That fear of the unknown is gone. If you've never been through it before, it's terrifying. What's going to happen? Are the police going to kick down the door, drag me out of the house, throw my belongings on the front lawn? After they've been through one, a lot of them have that feeling of like, man, that wasn't terrible. I lived. And so they're more likely to be willing to go through it again. Obviously, violent crimes, drug manufacturing or distribution, depending on where you are in the country. I know we work with a lot of municipalities and cities like Cedar Rapids in the Midwest, and this is a huge, huge issue. So, you want to make sure that they're not going to build a meth lab in your kitchen or in the basement. So, it should be fairly obvious red flags in terms of, does the crime or a conviction, is it concerning? Would you want to live next to that person? And so it's got to go both ways too, right? If they have a shoplifting offense from 6.5 years ago, and everything has been fine since, and there's nothing else on there that's concerning, then I would say it's worth a consideration. And I've always said background checks are a great conversation starter. So if you see something that shows up on there like an old shoplifting conviction from 6.5 years ago, talk to them, have a conversation. Hey, I see that this thing showed up. Can you tell me about it? What happened? And at least give them the opportunity to to tell you what happened, tell you the story. Yeah, it was a one-time horrible mistake. I can't believe it happened. Or, maybe it goes the other way. Maybe they're like, I wish I wouldn't have got caught. I do it all the time. I don't get caught anymore. So, so have a conversation if there's something that pops up that's somewhat concerning. But, the red flags should be determined ahead of time. Don't wait to run the background check and then start wondering what those red flags are. Sit down and put a little bit of thought into what you think those red flags should be and try to be specific. Violent crimes, damage to property, destruction of property, sex offender. If you've got a rental property, near a playground or a preschool or something like that, then, then you're obligated to check that and make sure that, that's a red flag. So put some thought to it before you run the background checks. When you run the background checks, it should be really easy. Go down the list and check and see. You don't want to overthink the background check and have to contemplate every single piece of information that comes up and have to, start from scratch each time. All right. Hope that answers your question. Feel free to reach out if you have any follow-ups on that. And obviously, during business hours at RentPrep, you can always call in, talk to a screener, live chat a screener. And, they look at thousands of reports a week, and they'll for sure be able to point you in the right direction there as well. All right. Question from Tommy. Question often comes up, but I've not found an answer. In Pennsylvania, are you allowed to ask for a drug test? So, uh, I would say probably not. And I'm not 100%. I'm sort of embarrassed to say I'm not 100% sure on the answer for that, but I'll tell you where I'm coming from. We do a little bit of drug screening here for employment screening. So if we work with a large property management company that manages, 3,000 doors, and they've got 25 employees or however many, and they're hiring a new maintenance guy, and they're doing an employment screening on him, they're ordering drug tests. So, which has, it has had its issues just in that realm, not tenant screening, but employment screening, right? As more and more states are decriminalizing marijuana, that starts to, change what employers are able to screen for and ask for, and that usually depends on the states as well. So I would say I don't think that drug screening has a place in tenant screening. That's my opinion. I don't think that Pennsylvania would allow you to drug test a tenant or an applicant. I could be wrong, but that's my gut feeling without jumping in and researching it. But I don't think that you'd be allowed to, and I don't know if you'd want to be honest with you. I know it seems like it potentially makes sense and doesn't seem that crazy, but let me put it this way: a good tenant is not going to want the hassle of having to be drug screened. I know that might not sound it might sound counterproductive or illogical, but good tenants, good tenants do just as much screening on you as you're doing on them. They want to make sure they've got a good landlord. They want a good property. All those things are important to them. And, if they know they can go to 10 other places and no one's going to ask for a drug test and they're going to get approved in 10 other places, then they're not going to want to do a drug test for you. If your rental property is in an area where, your expectations are low and you just want to avoid, somebody with a potential drug issue, and, maybe you think you're going to have some sort of issue and you just want to make sure you're at least limiting the drug use. Yeah, I can understand the logic. I wouldn't touch it. I wouldn't do it. So yeah, sorry, Tommy. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't ask for a drug test. I'm pretty sure that Pennsylvania does not allow you to do it in tenant screening. Most states don't. So that's my answer. All right, question from Julie. If I want to take my rental house out of service, how does that work? Out of service. I guess I'm going to need more information on that, because I don't know if you mean you don't want to rent it out anymore and you want to live in it, or just not rent it out anymore. I'm not sure what you mean by take your rental out of service. So if you can elaborate on that in the comments, I'll take another crack at it. But I'm not 100% sure what the context is there, or what it means to take a rental house out of service. So I'll skip over. I'll come back to you, Julie, if you can fill me in on anything there. This next question is from Paul. So a tenant approached me about a rent-to-own arrangement, but I was planning on selling this year. What are your thoughts on rent-to-own? Any advice? Well, they don't always turn out the way that you hope they do. I know that. The one positive, aspect of it is you're the bank. You're collecting, the interest in the finance charges on those. So, I would say I don't have the statistics or numbers, and maybe we just see it from maybe we get a lot of the negative experiences because of what we're doing here. But and I would say my gut tells me that a lot of times those end up falling apart. Those arrangements fall apart and they don't go as you would hope that they went. Not to say that that's going to be your situation. I think every situation's unique, and if you've got a really great, relationship with this tenant and everything seems to check out, then maybe consider it. But anybody who wants to do a rent to own, they typically can't purchase their own home on their own, or maybe he just loves that house. And so, maybe if anything, see if you can push him to actually purchase the property, if that's an option. If you're willing to take on the risk and the idea of earning some of that interest and being the bank appeals to you, then I would just make sure that your attorney is putting together a super solid contract. So you want to be able to back out of it. You want to be able to, not get stuck in something that you don't want to, to get stuck in. All of that interest and everything else, the appeal of it goes away when you start dealing with the headaches. And, in hindsight, I'm sure you probably would have much rather have just sold it outright and, walked away at that point. So just make sure that it's a good situation. Make sure that you got a really good, solid contract in place. But yeah, there's some upsides to it. If you're looking at it as a longer-term passive investment strategy, and you're collecting some interest on it, and obviously, if they can't purchase a house, through traditional lending, then they're going to pay higher rates to you. All right, doubling back, Julie. So Julie, you want to take your rental house out of service, and then you update it with yes to stop renting. If you have a lease agreement in place, you have to honor that lease agreement. So, if there's 2 months, 6 months, whatever's left on the that agreement that you signed, you got to honor that just as much as they have to honor their portion of it. So if you have a current agreement in place, honor that agreement. When the time comes and you're not going to renew the lease for another term, you want to make sure that you're giving proper notice for non-renewal. So, I would make sure you're giving plenty of notice, not only what your state requires, but, make sure that they know what's happening. If you know ahead of time that you don't want them to continue to stay there, or you don't want to rent it anymore, make sure that you're giving them plenty of time in advance, and it's not like they had the rug pulled out from under them. And then obviously, your state may require that you provide official notice within a certain time frame. So it's usually 30, 60, or 90, and then during COVID under the CARES Act, it's usually going to be 90. So I would say start your communication at least at 90 days. All right. Question from Bill, and I hope that answers your question, Julie. Or if you have any questions or follow-ups, feel free to reach out on that. Question from Bill. I evicted a tenant. I just went to the property and all their things are still there. What do I do with this property? First off, sorry to hear that, Bill. That's such a pain, I know. And unfortunately, what you're going to have to do is most likely treat it as an abandonment. So I'm assuming all their things are there and they're not there anymore. So if that's the case, then treat it as an abandonment. If you look on RentPrep.com, we've got a lot of step-by-step guides on how to treat an abandonment and what you should do. So without misquoting time frames or anything like that, I can tell you that you're going to end up putting the property in storage, trying to give proper notice to the tenant that you evicted, that the property's in storage. Give them a date to come get it. And if they don't come get it, then you basically do a storage auction the belongings off. But what you never ever want to do is assume that it's your property at this point. It's not. Or damage it or destroy it in any way. And I know it seems unfathomable or crazy that somebody's going to accuse you of damaging something that they abandoned and left behind. I have seen those exact situations. So, as much as you might want to let the lamp slip out of your fingers and roll down the stairs, treat it like you would if you were moving your stuff, and put it in storage, and treat it as a typical abandonment. If you want more on that, go to RentPrep.com, do a search for abandonment, and follow the steps there. It'll give you more on time frames and notifications and things like that. All right. Ashley's asking me if I want to continue. Yes, I will continue. So as long as you guys are fine with it, I have no issues with it. Okay. So I have a tenant that sent a request to terminate the lease early. I advised the consequences of early termination, and they got defensive. They said they won't pay anything after the end of June. Their lease is up in September. How do you handle this? They're in Indiana. They're also refusing to let us show the house. They state they will call the authorities if we come in. Ugh. All right. So, sorry. Again, this is from Sharon. Sorry to hear that you're going through this, Sharon. These are the worst situations. So, first off, hold them to the lease, the agreement, and then you have to treat it as abandonment when they leave. So if they leave in June and the lease is valid until September, I wouldn't stop charging them rent through September. If you re-rent, obviously you can't charge rent while you're collecting rent from someone else. But if it takes you, 2 months to turn that property over, I would for sure be charging them those 2 months worth of rent. Send it to a collection agency, get a judgment against them. But I wouldn't just let them out of their obligation. It might be different if they were willing to work with you, but if they're not, and they're not willing to let you in, obviously, you could try all the normal things that you would to cure this situation, right? Like trying to give them reasonable notification to enter the property, and they're just not compliant whatsoever and not going to let you in. They're going to be a problem for you. I would also potentially consider, I know this is not always a popular suggestion, and it's not always perfect for every situation. So I'm just going to throw this out there as a potential solution for you. Cash for keys. Pay them to get out, and or make an agreement with them. Hey, I'll give you your security deposit back if you leave the property in good condition, and I can show it the last 30 days you're there. It's going to be a bad situation, it sounds like. So I don't think you have anything to lose to try to see if there's a little give and take, but the reality is, they're breaking the lease, period. Whether they gave you ample notification or not, they're breaking the lease. And, I would treat it as such. And if they leave, then you treat it as an abandonment, and then don't let them out of the remainder of that lease. Charge them rent until you re-rent that, for sure. Hope that answers your question. Again, sorry to hear that you're going through that. It's going to be potentially a bumpy month for you. All right. So, I see Sharon's got an add-on to that. So if we get a deposit from a new tenant and a signed lease for July, do we send them notification confirming early termination? Yeah, I would say definitely send them some sort of communication that you were able to be totally transparent about it, that you were able to re-rent the property, and have a good accounting for what money they owe, and make sure that you're not in a state that won't allow you to use security deposit for past due rent. But because of the CARE Act right now, most states are allowing for that. So in this situation, that might really help you out, might benefit. If you can keep your existing tenants' security deposit, maybe cover some of the losses. But yeah, so that's a big what if still too, Sharon, because you don't know what the condition of that property is going to be in, which is why I would say that might be one of my bigger concerns right now, is that these current tenants that you have aren't going to flush their socks down the toilet and kick holes in the wall on the way out. So it's not a bad idea to have some good communication with them and try to find some sort of middle ground. All right. Question from Carol. How often should I do an inspection on my rental property? How far in advance do I need to let my tenant know? It's a good question. So I'll start with the last part first. So how far in advance do I need to let my tenant know? Again, on RentPrep.com, in our blog, we've got a number of pieces of content that I know speak about this and how to give proper notification. I think we even have some forms in there. But, usually you want to give 24 hours and work with them. Call them up. Hey, let them know what the intentions are. We're doing an inspection. Usually you don't want to let your tenant know, hey, we want to see how badly you've messed the apartment up. So usually you want to hide the broccoli and the mashed potatoes there and say, hey, we want to come in, change out air filters, check for plumbing, and, do a legitimate inspection. And obviously while you're there, you're going to be checking the condition of the property and making sure that everything is in good order. My personal opinion on this, I don't think landlords do this enough. I think a lot of problems could be avoided altogether, or at least reduced in severity if landlords did this more often, and with a little bit of frequency. So I've heard of some landlords doing twice a year inspections. At my rental property, that is the case. I'm almost positive it's twice a year that the inspections are done. So I don't do them anymore, which is why I don't know off the top of my head. Andrew Schultz, who is our podcast host and in the community, he manages one of my properties that he's doing an inspection. I'm pretty sure it's twice a year there still, but it may be once a year. But minimum once a year, minimum. Get in there, take a look around. If you have not been in your rental property in years, that should not be a great feeling right now for you. You got to get in there and you got to see what's going on. And if for nothing else, I mean, not to say that they're, horrible people doing horrible things purposely. Those people are out there, and you want to make sure that that's not the case either. But, just for, wear and tear and when things are breaking down and so it's not a shock. And a lot of times you can, it's just like having, your own home. You wouldn't not, go down in your basement for 2 years or 3 years. You would not change your filters. So that's why I always like the idea of landlords, not allowing tenants to even change air filters and furnace filters, is because I want a reason to get in there. I want to have a reason to go in and check some stuff out, have the filters with you, have some extra light bulbs on hand, as you're checking around. It's not a bad idea to have a checklist. Again, if you go to rentprep.com, you can look at A move-in, move-out checklist will suffice, and also we may have annual inspection checklists for free up there too. But the move-in, move-out checklist will be good enough. But I would have like a clipboard, a checklist. It looks like you got good reason to be in there. You're not spying on them or creeping on them, and makes them feel a little bit better and maybe a little bit less invasive as to why you're going in there. So. Twice a year, not crazy. With good reason if you're going in there twice a year. Once a year, minimum. I would say minimum. You should be in there at least once a year doing an inspection. So that's my opinion on that. I would say, it's not crazy at all. Just look like you have a legit reason to go in there and like you're organized and you know what you're looking for. All right. Let me see. I'm going to answer this other one here. I've got to open the door. I almost made it made it just over an hour, but I got to open the door. So I'm gonna run over and open the door. I'll give you guys a quick peek of the RentPrep office. Also, no screeners are here. We closed about 45 minutes ago, but. Show you guys where we're doing background checks. So, next question I've gotten here is from Marquise. Vinyl or rug flooring for a rental? So, man, vinyl's awesome because it holds up great. And you can pretty much do anything to it. Matter of fact, we've got vinyl floors here. Let me show you. They're laid out in like a herringbone configuration, but spill stuff, and we had a screener who was leaning back too far on her chair the other day and flipped backwards on the chair, and the flooring is no worse for wear. So vinyl floors, those things hold up. Rugs tend to soak up urine of any species, so and any kind of liquids or anything. So I would say, for me personally, I don't have any rugs at all in my rental properties. 100% vinyl flooring, even in the bedrooms. If they want a rug, throw an area rug in there. That's my opinion. I wouldn't want a rug. I hear too many horror stories from landlords about having to clean rugs and rip old rugs out, and then, you're not sure what the condition of the flooring is going to be when you rip the rugs out. But more often than not, you're cutting chunks of flooring and subflooring out to replace stuff that you can't get out of it. So, giving you guys a quick tour. RentPrep, got our conference room here. Our huddle room over here. Sorry if I'm making you sick. This is our screening floor over here where all the background checks are done. And as you can see, I'm in the office alone right now, so no one else here, but at least I get a little airflow in the in my office as I come back through. All right. Okay, so Marquise, I hope that answers your question. I'm a huge fan of vinyl. Easy to clean, holds up. Pee just sits on it. Maybe it gets underneath a little bit, but nothing like a rug that has to be cleaned fairly often and a lot of times professionally cleaned. So I'd rip those. If it was me, I'd rip those rugs out and put vinyl in everywhere I possibly could. So, all right, folks. I think that's it. We went over, but I'm happy we had plenty of questions, and hopefully I was somewhat helpful. Like I said before, if you guys have any questions or follow-ups or anything, shoot it through the Facebook group, email me, steve@rentprep.com. Happy to help you guys out, and happy to continue to doing these as long as everyone's finding them useful. I don't mind doing it. I'm getting more and more used to the idea of talking to myself in an empty office, which is strange. Last question, Marquise. Washer and dryer or no washer and dryer. I have a laundromat walkable from my rental. Well, you know, the washer and dryer is attractive to a lot of people. So, you might end up attracting a higher quality applicant or tenant because you have a washer and dryer. So I'd consider it. Just know that you got to include that washer and dryer in the lease and talk about what the expectations are and what happens if that washer and dryer breaks and, it's not their washer and dryer that they can't take and leave with when they leave, if it's yours. If you give them the a space and they can hook up their own, then they're responsible to bring their own washer and dryer. That's certainly an option. And then that way they can decide either buy my own washer and dryer and hook it up myself, or maybe it's worth it for me to just go down to the laundromat. But if it's yours and you're putting it in there, it's your responsibility to maintain it. So if it breaks, it's on your dime. You got to fix it. So just keep that in mind. And typically you have to replace it if it breaks. You can't just say, well, it broke and you broke it, so now you don't get a washer and dryer anymore. If they entered that lease agreement and the washer and dryer was part of that agreement and it was available, then you have to make sure that it continues to be available, through the lifetime of that lease. So just know what you're getting into. Again, make sure that you got some language in there in the lease about what the expectations are. I think we probably have some examples of that on RentPrep.com as well. And, again, it's not a bad idea. It makes it more attractive for sure. I just replaced a washer in my rental and a dishwasher. And the dishwasher, I feel like I just bought one probably 2 years ago, and I went kind of like a cheap lower end model, which I should have known better, but I wanted to save a couple of bucks, put the cheaper model in there, and Andrew Schultz just reached out to me a couple of days ago and said, hey, that dishwasher didn't last. We've got to replace the dishwasher. So, it's my responsibility. I gotta replace it. I gotta, buy a new one, have it installed, put it in there. So just keep that in mind. One more thing you got to maintain and potentially replace, but like we talked about earlier, what is the real value of a excellent tenant? In that rental property that I've got, I love those tenants there. They treat the place like home. They've been there now for 3 years. Never missed a payment. Never made a late payment through COVID. I mean, they're excellent tenants. I wouldn't want to lose them. So for me, it's like, dishwasher broke. Hang tight. I'm going to get you a new one. We're going to replace that thing. We'll get it in there as soon as possible. I want to keep them happy. A good tenant to me is worth a lot more than replacing the dishwasher or anything else. I don't lose sleep at night thinking about them and how they're treating the property. So that, it's hard to put a price on that, but it's valuable for sure. And if you've had a bad tenant, you know how valuable that is. So, all right, guys. Again, thank you. I'm sure we're going to do another one of these in a couple of weeks. They've been getting some great response, and people seem to like them. So I'm happy to do them and help out as much as I can with whatever I can. So until next time, see you guys later, and see you in the Facebook community, guys.